My name is Tom Booth. I'm 27 years old, and up until March 14th, 2026, I thought my biggest problem was the skyrocketing rent in our apartment complex in Savannah, Georgia. It was a humid Tuesday, the kind where the air feels like a wet wool blanket. I was walking along the riverfront with my girlfriend, Sarah. You might have seen stock footage of couples like us, looking happy, strolling by the water, the sun hitting the brickwork of the old cotton warehouses. I remember wearing my favorite green flannel shirt. I felt good. I felt young. We were talking about the upcoming Easter service at our church. I was supposed to lead the youth small group that Sunday. Then, the rhythm of my heart just skipped. It didn't feel like a heart attack from the movies. There was no clutching of the chest or shouting. It was a cold, hollow sensation, like someone had poured liquid nitrogen into my sternum. I stopped walking near a black lamp post. Sarah kept going for a second, laughing at something she'd said, before she realized I wasn't beside her. When she turned back, her face shifted from a smile to a mask of pure terror. I tried to tell her I was fine, but my lungs wouldn't expand. The oxygen was there, but my body had forgotten how to take it. I slumped against the railing overlooking the Savannah River. The water looked oily and dark. My vision started to tunnel, the vibrant greens of the trees and the tan stone of the walkway bleeding into a dull, vibrating gray. I could hear Sarah screaming for help, her voice sounding like it was coming from the bottom of a deep well. A man in a jogging suit stopped. I remember the smell of his sweat and the way his shadow fell over me. "He's not breathing," the man said. His voice was flat, clinical. That was the last thing I heard in the physical world, the sound of a stranger diagnosing my death, while the girl I loved gripped my hand so hard I thought her fingernails would draw blood. The concrete was hot against my cheek, and then the heat vanished. The transition wasn't a tunnel or a flash of light. It was a sudden, jarring shift in perspective. 1 second I was staring at a discarded cigarette butt on the pavement, and the next, I was looking down at the top of the jogger's head. I was hovering about 15 feet in the air. I saw myself. I looked small, pale, and incredibly still. Sarah was on her knees, her white sweater staining brown from the riverfront grime. She was performing chest compressions, her hair falling over her face. I wanted to tell her to stop, that I could see her, that I wasn't in that body anymore, but I had no throat, no breath, no way to vibrate the air. The paramedics arrived within 6 minutes. I know because I watched the digital clock on the dashboard of the ambulance as it screeched to a halt. I watched them use the defibrillator. My body jerked, a pathetic, mechanical jump on the pavement, but I felt nothing. It was like watching someone try to jumpstart a car that didn't have an engine. I followed them into the back of the rig. I sat in the corner, invisible, watching the lead medic, a guy named Miller. I saw it on his badge, shake his head at his partner. "We're losing him," Miller whispered. He wasn't being dramatic. He was just tired. We reached the hospital, and the chaos intensified. The smell of antiseptic was overwhelming, even though I didn't have a nose. It was a sensory memory manifesting as reality. They pushed me into trauma room 3. I saw the heart monitor flatline. That long, continuous beep is the loneliest sound in the universe. A doctor, a woman with tired eyes and a wedding ring taped to her scrubs, checked my pupils. She looked at the clock on the wall. "Time of death, 10:42 a.m., she said. In that moment, the room didn't disappear. Instead, the walls simply ceased to be opaque. The hospital faded, and the Georgia sun was replaced by a light that didn't come from a sun, but from a presence. I wasn't in a cathedral or a cloud. I was standing in a place that felt like the memory of a home I'd never actually visited. It was quiet, the kind of silence that has weight. And he was there. He wasn't wearing a robe, and he didn't have a glow-in-the-dark halo. He looked like a man who had worked with his hands his entire life. He was wearing a simple, dark tunic, and his eyes were a color I can't describe because we don't have a name for it in the visible spectrum. He didn't say welcome home. He didn't even smile at first. He just looked at me with a profound, searing honesty that made me want to hide, even though there was nowhere to go. "Tom," he said. His voice didn't vibrate in my ears. It resonated in my marrow. "You've spent a lot of time in my house lately." He was referring to the church back in Savannah, the building with the expensive sound system and the coffee bar in the lobby where I spent 20 hours a week volunteering. I felt a surge of pride, a reflex from my life. I started to tell him about the youth program, about the growth metrics our pastor was so proud of, about the new building fund. I thought I was giving him a progress report. He held up a hand, and the pride turned to ash in my mouth. The environment around us shifted. We weren't in that peaceful space anymore. We were standing in the back of my own church, but it looked different. The air was thick with a black, oily smoke that no one else seemed to notice. The congregants were singing, their hands raised, but their faces were blank, like porcelain dolls. I saw the pastor on stage, bathed in professional stage lighting, but his shadow on the back wall was distorted, jagged, and reaching toward the people in the front row. Jesus didn't look at the stage. He looked at me, and his expression was one of intense, grieving gravity. "They are building a kingdom," he said, "but it isn't mine, and the warning I gave is being ignored." As we stood in the back of my church, the air grew colder. Jesus didn't move, but the scene around us began to accelerate. I watched the Sunday morning rush, the perfect families in their coordinated outfits, the hum of the high-end espresso machine in the foyer, the flickering LED screens displaying the week's giving goals. It looked like success. It looked like everything I had been taught to strive for. But as I looked closer, I saw the oil again. It wasn't just smoke. It was a physical residue covering the door handles, the offering buckets, even the touchscreens where parents checked in their kids. "Look at the hands, Tom," he said. I focused on a man I knew well, Mark, a donor who sat on the elder board. He was shaking hands with a newcomer, flashing a practiced, welcoming smile. But in this realm, I could see Mark's heart. It wasn't a pulsing organ, it was a ledger. It was filled with numbers, tax write-offs, and the social capital he gained by being seen in the front row. There was no love there, only a transaction. The newcomer felt it too. I saw the way the young man flinched, a subtle withdrawal that he couldn't explain to himself, a feeling that he was being recruited rather than reached. Jesus walked toward the giving kiosk. He didn't turn it over like the tables in the temple. He just placed a hand on the plastic casing. "The warning I gave was about the leaven," he whispered, and his voice carried a weight that made the floor feel like it was liquefying. "They have traded the narrow gate for a wide-mouthed funnel. They measure my spirit by the square footage of their debt." I felt a sick realization crawl up my spine. I had spent 3 years of my life raising money for that specific kiosk. I had told the youth group that their investment was a direct seed into heaven. Standing next to the source of all things, those words felt like a betrayal. The scene shifted abruptly. We weren't in the sanctuary anymore. We were in a small, cramped office I recognized instantly. It was the associate pastor's office, my boss, Dave. The lights were dim, and Dave was sitting at his desk, his face buried in his hands. On his computer screen was a spreadsheet titled Retention Risk. My name was on it. Next to my name was a red flag and a note. "Tom is asking too many questions about the mission fund. Potential liability." This was the personal fracture. I had trusted Dave. He was the man who had mentored me, the one who had prayed over me when I was struggling with my rent. But seeing it from this perspective, I saw the truth. Dave wasn't worried about my soul. He was worried about the optics. He was worried that if I kept digging into where the mission money actually went, the administrative costs that swallowed 80% of the donations, I would blow a hole in the budget. I felt a sharp, physical pain in my chest, a spiritual echo of the collapse I'd had on the riverfront. Jesus stood behind Dave's chair. He didn't look at the screen with anger, but with a profound, quiet sorrow that was harder to witness than rage. "When the institution becomes the god," he said, looking at me, "the people become the fuel. You are being burned to keep the lights on, Tom." I realized in that moment that my community was a curated performance. If I stopped producing, if I stopped being the energetic face of the youth group, I was a liability. My throat felt tight. I looked at Jesus and asked the question that had been rotting in my gut for months. "Is this every church?" He didn't answer with words. He showed me a vision of 1,000 steeples across the country, all glowing with that same oily, black smoke. The office walls dissolved, and we were standing on a high, grassy ridge overlooking a sprawling American suburb. Below us, dozens of churches were visible, their parking lots full. It was a beautiful, peaceful morning, but the tension in the air was screaming. Jesus turned to face me fully now. The warning wasn't a suggestion, it was a declaration. "The church has become a theater of the self," he said. They use my name as a brand, but they have forgotten my face. They preach a gospel of comfort while the world outside their glass walls is starving for truth. He reached out and touched my shoulder. The touch was electric, grounded, and terrifyingly real. Listen to me, Tom. The warning is this. The structure is about to crack. Not from the outside, not from the government or the culture, but from the weight of its own rot. I am withdrawing my hand from the buildings that have become monuments to men. Within this year, the things they have built in my name will begin to fail. The scandals will not be covered up anymore. The money will dry up in ways that defy logic. The influence they prize so much will turn into a curse. He looked down at the suburbs, then back at me. The people inside are being led into a desert, thinking it's an oasis. They are being told that their prosperity is a sign of my favor. But I tell you, their bank accounts are full while their spirits are bankrupt. The church you serve, the one you love, is the first to fall. It has become a cage for the very people I came to set free. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him about the good we did, the canned food drives, the holiday plays. But I couldn't speak. The sheer authority of his presence stripped away every excuse I had ever made for the system I was part of. Jesus didn't move, but the ridge we were standing on seemed to vibrate with the weight of his next words. He looked me directly in the eyes, and for the first time, I felt a flash of something that wasn't just sorrow. It was a holy, focused intensity. Tom, you asked if it was every church. It is every house built on sand, he said. He gestured toward the horizon where the sun was hitting the glass steeples of Savannah. The warning is about the great exchange. They have exchanged the Holy Spirit for high-definition cameras. They have exchanged the broken heart for a polished brand. This is why the power has left the building. He stepped closer, and the environment shifted again. We were back in my church, but it was empty. The stage lights were off, and the silence was deafening. Directly after you return, he said, the leadership will meet. They will not pray for your soul. They will discuss the insurance liability of your collapse on the river walk. They will discuss how to frame your absence so the youth don't lose momentum. This is the rot, Elias. When a brother's life becomes a PR crisis, the lampstand has already been removed. I felt a cold shiver. It was a direct, concrete prediction of a betrayal I hadn't even experienced yet. He placed his hand over my heart, and I felt the phantom beat of my physical body miles away in the ER. The church in this country is entering its winter. The institutions that pride themselves on their influence will find their doors locked. Not by a decree from a king, but by the weight of their own compromise. Those who have used my name to build their own empires will watch them crumble into the dust of their own scandals. The warning is this: come out of the system and find the person. If you stay to save the institution, you will be buried in the rubble. The empty sanctuary began to dissolve into a swirl of white and gray. I felt a tugging sensation, like a hook caught in my chest, pulling me backward. I knew I was being sent back. I didn't want to go. The peace of his presence, even with the weight of the warning, was better than the suffocating reality of the world I had left. I can't go back to that, I whispered. I can't sit in those pews knowing what I know. They'll think I'm crazy. Jesus looked at me with a profound, steady compassion. They will, he said simply. Truth is always a foreign language in a house built on lies. But you are not going back to save the building, Tom. You are going back for the ones who are trapped inside it, the ones who are hungry and are being fed stones. You must tell them that I am not in the bricks. I am in the broken. He held out his hand, and for a second, I saw a flash of my future. Not a cinematic montage, but a series of hard, lonely moments. I saw myself standing in a parking lot, crying. I saw an access denied screen on my work email. The choice is yours, he said. You can return and keep silent, and you will have your comfort, your salary, and your social standing. Or you can speak the warning and lose the world they built, but find the kingdom I promised. But know this, the collapse is already in motion. Even as you breathe again, the first stone is falling. I looked at his hand, then at the fading light of that place. I realized that my life had been a series of comfortable lies. I reached out and touched his palm. The moment our skin met, the silent peace was shattered by the sound of a mechanical gasp. The transition back was violent. It wasn't a gentle slide, it was a crash. My lungs slammed open, and the air of the hospital room felt like it was full of shards of glass. I bolted upright, my back arching off the thin mattress. The long beep of the heart monitor broke into a frantic, rhythmic chirping. "He's back. We have a rhythm," someone shouted. It was Miller, the paramedic from the ambulance. He was still there, his face drenched in sweat. I couldn't speak. I could only heave, my body trying to process the sudden return of gravity and pain. The doctor with the tired eyes was standing over me, her mouth open in a perfect O of shock. She looked at the clock, the same clock I had watched from the ceiling. It was 10:51 a.m. I had been clinically dead for 9 minutes. Tom, can you hear me?" she asked, shining a penlight into my eyes. The light was blinding, a pathetic imitation of the light I had just left. I tried to nod, but my neck felt like it was made of lead. I looked past her, toward the doorway of Trauma Room 3. Sarah was there. She was leaning against the doorframe, her face pale, her white sweater ruined by the river mud. She looked like she had seen a ghost, and in a way, she had. But as our eyes met, I didn't feel the rush of relief I expected. Instead, I felt the first ripple of the personal fracture Jesus had warned me about. I saw the fear in her eyes, not just fear for my life, but a strange, flickering uncertainty. She looked at me, and I knew I was different. The Tom she knew, the one who climbed the ladder and spoke the right Christian buzzwords, hadn't come back from the riverfront. Recovery was a blur of beeping monitors and the sterile, rhythmic thumping of blood pressure cuffs. I spent 3 days in the ICU at Memorial Health. My physical body was healing, but my mind was stuck in that empty sanctuary with the oily smoke. On the second night, Dave, my associate pastor, came to visit. He didn't come alone. He brought a basket from a local bakery and a get well card signed by the entire staff. He sat in the plastic chair by my bed, his legs crossed, checking his Apple Watch every few minutes. He looked exactly like he did in the vision. Polished, concerned, and completely disconnected from the gravity of what had happened. "Tom, buddy, you gave us a real scare," Dave said, his voice dropping into that soft, pastoral register he used for funerals. "The whole church is praying. We've got a 24-hour prayer chain going for your recovery." I looked at him, and for a second, I saw the ledger instead of his face. I saw the retention risk spreadsheet. I asked him, my voice raspy from the intubation tube, "Dave, what did the elders say about the mission fund audit? The one I brought up last week." The room went dead silent. The hum of the oxygen machine felt like a roar. Dave's smile didn't drop, it just froze. It was a practiced, mechanical freezing. "Now isn't the time for business, Tom. You need to focus on your health. We've decided to have Mark take over your youth responsibilities for the next few months. We want you to have a Sabbath season. No emails, no meetings." He reached out to pat my hand, but I pulled it away. I saw the flicker of annoyance in his eyes, the liability reacting. He wasn't there to comfort a man who had died. He was there to manage the transition of a cog that had broken in the machine. He left the basket on the rolling table and exited without praying. A week later, I was back in our apartment. Sarah was being incredibly kind, but the air between us was brittle. I tried to tell her. I sat her down on our beige sofa and tried to explain the smoke, the ledger, and the warning Jesus gave about the collapse of the structures we built our lives around. I told her what he said about the church, our church. She listened, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of tea, her eyes darting toward the door like she wanted to run. "Tom," she whispered, her voice trembling, "you had a traumatic brain injury. You were dead for 9 minutes. The doctors said there might be hallucinations. You're scaring me. You're talking about our friends, our community, like they're villains." I realized then that she couldn't see the smoke. To her, the church was the place where we felt safe, where we had a social circle, where we were someone. To suggest the foundation was rotting was to suggest her entire world was a lie. The fracture became a canyon over the next 48 hours. I received a formal email from the church office. It wasn't a get well note. It was a PDF document outlining the terms of my voluntary leave of absence. It stated that due to the medical nature of my collapse, I was being relieved of my duties to prevent any potential legal or safety complications for the youth department. They offered me 2 weeks severance. My login to the church database was already disabled. I sat in the dark of our living room. looking at the glowing screen of my laptop, and I heard his voice again. When the institution becomes the god, the people become the fuel. The final confirmation didn't come with a lightning bolt. It came on a Tuesday morning, exactly 2 weeks after I died. I was sitting on a bench in Forsyth Park, watching the moss hang still on the oak trees. My phone buzzed. It was a news alert from a local Georgia outlet. The headline was dry, almost boring. Major regional nonprofit faces federal inquiry over misallocated relief funds. I clicked it. My heart didn't skip this time. It went cold. The nonprofit was a shell corporation owned by the elder board of my church. The mission fund I had been asking about. The article detailed how millions of dollars intended for low-income housing and international aid had been diverted into a private real estate portfolio. One of the names listed in the investigation was Mark, the man with the ledger heart I had seen in the vision. The second name was Dave. The collapse Jesus warned about wasn't a metaphor. The first stone had fallen, and it had crushed the very people who claimed to be building his kingdom. I walked back to the apartment, my legs feeling heavy. When I walked in, Sarah was crying. She had the news open on her phone. She looked at me, her face pale, the white sweater from the riverfront memory replaced by a black hoodie. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me with a terrifying realization that the man she thought was hallucinating had actually been told the truth. I looked out the window at the Savannah skyline. The steeples were still there, gleaming in the Georgian sun, but for the first time, I didn't see a sanctuary. I saw a hollow shell. I reached into my pocket and felt the small, plastic key fob to the church office. I walked to the trash can and dropped it in. The click of the plastic hitting the metal liner was the loudest sound I've ever heard.
If this message felt important, it probably was. There are more stories like this, and they only get deeper. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next one, because some warnings aren't meant to be ignored.